Welcome back to Question Period on this Sunday. As the leaders of G7 countries gear up for 2 days of talks in Kananaskis, sources tell CTV News the U.S. and Canada have certainly intensified negotiations in recent weeks around an economic and security pact. They also say a framework for such an agreement has traded hands between the two parties. Canada and the U.S. have been in a trade war since February, when U.S. President Donald Trump began rolling out a series of tariffs. While sources tell us there's been substantial progress on such a pact, there's no certainty, literally no certainty at this point around a timeline, thanks to a couple of things. First, Donald Trump's own mercurial nature, plus recent crises, namely the protests in Los Angeles, the president's feud with billionaire entrepreneur and former BFF Elon Musk, and of course, Israel's strikes on Iran in any retaliation. Our Sunday strategy session is here to dig into all of that. No short order. Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Lisa Raitt is former Conservative deputy leader and current vice chair and managing director of global investment banking at CIBC. And Nick Nanos is chief data scientist and founder at Nanos Research. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I wanted to start off on the prospect of an agreement. I was speaking to someone sort of involved in the talks, Scott, and they did not think something would happen formally ahead of the G7, but the meetings have been going, quote unquote, very well. What is your take on the prospect of one and politically what it could mean?
Well, I mean, politically and economically, it would hopefully provide some measure of stability and certainty and predictability, which surely to goodness is what Canadian industry and workers and all of us mean. Like, I was talking earlier today with some folks in Windsor, and just imagine how on edge that town is. Your morning shift is going to be gone. Well, actually, now it's going to come back. So, if you have some sort of structured deal and arrangement, and if you can imagine that you can count on it, which is always the question when it comes to Donald Trump, I think that would be a gigantic victory. I think it would be an enormously welcome event. Whether or not it will happen, I'm unsurprised to hear that your sources are telling you that there's no certainty. Of course, there's no certainty with Donald Trump. I mean, he's a walking grenade. Look at what's happening in LA, and now probably set to spread across cities all weekend long in the United States. Look at the instability that we're watching, really very critical instability in the Middle East. So, this G7 gathers at a moment of genuine crisis. Are we talking about rewiring the world because the United States no longer wants to be a superpower? Are we talking about responding to an urgent crisis brewing in the Middle East? Are we talking about trying to secure a trade deal bilateral between Canada and the U.S.? Well, unfortunately, Mark Carney's thinking about all of those things. That is a big job.
Just setting us up for a lighthearted couple of days over in Alberta. Lisa, on the prospect of an agreement, in particular, what was conveyed to me as well was around the U.S.'s, and this is no breaking news, adherence to the idea of tariffs, right? That the Canada's objective is certainly to see them removed, but that the possibility of them being completely removed is looking not great. How accepting do you think Canadians and industry more largely will be of some level of tariffs? Like, is there a level do you think they could accept?
I do. And I do think a lot of it has already been baked in to either pricing or into the markets. It depends upon how big the tariff is. A 10% tariff probably can be absorbed within the economy and people will merrily go along their way. I am very concerned, though, about other aspects. There's a piece of legislation currently in the Senate of the United States that has this kind of retaliatory tax involved. That is actually even, I would say, more problematic in the long run with respect to the relationship between Canada and the United States. So whatever agreement comes up between U.S. and Canada, I'm hoping that this legislation or this part of the legislation, it's in the one big beautiful bill. I hope that gets sorted out and settled as well, because that is another piece of uncertainty when it comes to taxation.
If there is some sort of arrangement that is, in the near future somewhere agreed to, Nick, what is your assessment of the degree to which that might impact the domestic political landscape? And I ask because I remember during the election and right prior to it, there was a point in which you were showing the concern around Trump was the #1 issue for Canadians, and in the period since, when it seems like he's taking less direct aim at us and maybe perhaps at others, it's receded a bit in importance, according to your numbers.
Yeah, you know, in the latest weekly tracking, I think only about 15% of Canadians cite Trump, the U.S., as their top national issue of concern. Is down 8 points in the last 4 weeks. But you know what, Vashi, here's what I'm looking at, not whether there's an agreement, what happens after the agreement. I think the fact of the matter is that for Donald Trump, for us to come to an agreement with Donald Trump, it will have to be an agreement of some sort. Well, he will declare victory, right? He will declare victory in the United States and around the world in terms of the deal being good for the United States. So there's going to be some political blowback from that in Canada, and questioning what we actually have to agree to in order to have this level of stability. And the other thing is the cost. You know, like the government has already made one step forward on defense spending. You know, that might not be enough, because now our NATO allies are looking at 2.5%, 3% spending on NATO. Where's that money going to come from? And you know, the thing is, you know, for the Carney government, this might be a really tough period, but it might be easy compared to 1 or 2 years from now, when they're dealing with the fallout of whatever agreement that they might be able to come to with Donald Trump, and then the bill, and how that impacts spending on health care, you know, spending on all those other different priorities that Canadians say are important, you know, beyond the things that we have to kind of put on the table to get that deal with Donald Trump.
Scott, I'll just turn to you, because picking up on what Nick was talking about, I think it's true that the crisis, the idea of the threat that Donald Trump poses, has certainly given political cover in a way. I'm not sure if that's the best term, but it's informed the framing that the government and that the Liberals and the Prime Minister has put forward on why they need to do a lot of what they're doing in the way they're doing. If there is a pact, something that kind of allows people to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, what does that do to the framing that they are putting forward and the sort of leeway that Canadians have provided them, and even politicians from other parties?
Well, I think the government will lose no momentum. If the risk is, oh my gosh, are we going to become victims of our success if we actually secure a deal? Does that mean the sense of urgency and the indulgence of the public, and to a certain degree even political opponents, to move very fast and to cut corners on legislative process and review, will all that evaporate? And my guess is no, because we remain in this incredibly tempestuous period of time, with a world changing all around us. And Donald Trump remains president of the United States. And I think everyone knows that as long as Trump is there, nothing is certain. The certain things aren't certain. The uncertain things aren't certain. And certainly, our relationship with the United States isn't certain. And so I think that the climate of crisis and the anxiety and the need to move on to other things, to at least double track our future, that which is tied to the United States and that which is untied to greatest degree possible, all that's going to make a lot of sense. And I do think it's going to remain difficult, therefore, for Pierre Poilievre to find percentage in this discussion. He's been almost invisible, and I think will likely remain so throughout the summer.
What do you think about that, Lisa?
Well, I think, you know, the other part that's interesting to me, and I'll address what Scott just said too. I find it interesting that in the past, when you're negotiating with the United States, you would oftentimes hear the provincial premier saying, we want a seat at the table. And you're not hearing that right now. They are definitely handing the ball to Prime Minister Carney and his team to do whatever needs to be done in terms of landing the deal with the United States. So I find that very interesting. And with respect to what you said, on Pierre and the Conservative Party, I think what we're experiencing and what is being borne out in the numbers, because you can see the popularity of Mark Carney and you can see the slipping popularity with respect to the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre in particular, what you're feeling and what you're seeing are Canadians going, it's not bad, right? Everything's okay. It seems to be working okay. And that's kind of the attitude that I get, even from Conservatives. It's like, it's not terrible. And I think that's being judged against how people felt about the Trudeau government for the last year, quite frankly. So if you're holding a mirror up, it's Carney's government is being actually compared to the old Trudeau government, and people are going, well, this is a breath of fresh air, isn't it? So it's not necessarily, I would say, a death knell for the Conservatives or for Pierre Poilievre. It's a moment in time. People are feeling relief. They feel confident in the government, and that should give the Prime Minister a lot of leeway to make the decisions, the hard decisions that have to be made with respect to our economy.
Lisa and Scott are referencing your numbers out this week, Nick, that, and we're going to bring them up for our viewers as well, that show, you know, while they were really in the weeks that followed the election incredibly competitive, like within a point of each other, I think you had them for a while. Following the throne speech and the delivery of the throne speech by the King and Parliament resuming, the Conservatives lost, you know, quite a bit of ground. Yeah,
they have actually, they're now 10 points back, which is kind of the worst showing that they've had before Justin Trudeau blew up. And, you know, even Pierre Poilievre's personal numbers, he's now 25 points behind Mark Carney. You know, the fact of the matter is that the Liberals under Mark Carney have left thin gruel for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. So now the Liberals are talking about building pipelines, including oil and liquefied natural gas. They're talking about defense spending. Oh, and why don't you just throw in bringing the king over? And,
border security.
And, you know, all those types of things. So what's left for the Conservatives to talk about? What, social issues, right? Like it's, you know, so big surprise that their numbers are down, that Pierre Poilievre, and, you know, for Pierre Poilievre, where is he? You know, he was one and is one of the most effective parliamentarians. He's scrappy, he's effective, he's targeted in what he does, but it's like, I think he's probably just recovering from the personal loss of his seat. He's got to get back in the game, because if he doesn't get back in the game, the longer that he's not back in the game, and the longer that Andrew Scheer, why don't we just say, and it might be unfair, another defeated Conservative leader, like that's who the Conservatives are. Oh, our leader lost their seat. Oh, let's put another Conservative defeated leader to represent our party.
Well, he's not a threat in that way, right? I think that was part of the motivation.
I know, but the optics, like, come on. Like, anyways, but, you know, the fact of the matter is Pierre Poilievre has to re-engage. He is a parliamentary asset. The Conservatives have to get him back into the House of Commons, but they have to figure out how are they going to be different from Mark Carney, and how are they going to carve out their own space, and that's going to be the toughest part.
I'd love to carve out 30 seconds for each of Scott and Lisa to just weigh in on that, because it is as Sunday Strats as it gets. Scott, you first, and then Lisa.
Well, one thing that I have to be careful about, and one thing that Pierre Poilievre should be very, very concerned with, is if you can't find much room left in the center, don't gladly, voluntarily leap to the extreme. And what we heard from him this week, the stridency on immigration, sounded to me like a real mistake. You want to stay with where public opinion is at. He seemed to me like he was moving to the margins. That's an unwise move.
Lisa, last word to you.
It's a long time to the next election. I think we can agree on that. And as a result, there's a lot of time in there for people to see whether or not the Carney government can execute on the promises that they're making, and they can build the pipelines that need to be built. In the meantime, Andrew Scheer is the right choice, I have to say. He is an effective communicator, quite frankly, and he's a company man. So it is the right person to put in a temporary base if that's what the leader plans on doing and running in the next by-election that comes up.
Okay, I got to leave it on
that. Which
that.
company is that? We Lost Inc.
Oh boy. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks everyone. Appreciated our Sunday strategy session. Scott Reid, Lisa Raitt, and Nick Nanos. When we come back today, a stark warning from Canada's Supreme Court Chief Justice. He says the rule of law and judicial independence are under attack in many countries. Why is he saying that? We'll go one-on-one with Chief Justice Richard Wagner after a short break.